Hello? Hello? Alright, there we go. We got the audio work. Am I not in public?
Detective work is hard enough without having to question your own grip on reality. One minute you're hunting a missing person across a remote island, the next you're dodging phantom migraines, sinister doctors, and hallucinations that hit harder than an escaped mental patient. This US Marshal just wanted to crack the case and catch the guy responsible for his wife's death. But the deeper that he digs, the more the island seems to mess with his head. Now he's chasing ghost stories, ignoring key evidence, and looking for clues in all the wrong places. Light up a cigarette and prepare for a descent into madness as we break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the insane asylum in Shutter Island. U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels is battling seasickness in the washroom of a small seafaring vessel. As the ship crosses the choppy waters, he collects himself and heads onto the main deck to meet his new partner, Chuck All. He spots his counterpart near the ship's bow, and the two men get acquainted with some basic small talk, like where they're from, girls back home. A prickly topic for Daniels, to be sure, who explains his wife died tragically in an apartment fire while he was away on duty. Ouch. But yeah, as the voyage continues, the conversation shifts towards their destination, the mysterious Shutter Island, home getaway for the criminally insane. The ship docks, and the marshals are met by a squad of armed guards. As the officers eye the newcomers with suspicion, the hospital's deputy warden, McPherson, introduces himself and offers to escort them to the main grounds. Once there, McPherson lays down some ground rules. The marshals are to follow all hospital protocols during the course of their investigation, which means handing over their firearms and staying away from wards, a repurposed Civil War fort where most of the dangerous prisoners are held. They reluctantly agree, and McPherson takes them to see Dr. Cawley, the head psychologist. The two marshals arrive at Cawley's office for introductions and a brief lesson on the doctor's treatment philosophy, which he describes as a moral fusion between law and order and clinical care. Simply put, Dr. Cawley believes in treating even the most violent and delusional patients with compassion. With the pleasantries out of the way, Daniels begins questioning the doctor on the case that brought them to the island. At some point in the previous night, a female patient named Rachel Solando escaped custody. Solando is considered dangerous, having murdered her 3 children by drowning them in a lake behind her house. And making matters worse, no one can say for sure how she escaped. Her cell was still locked when the staff discovered her missing, and the ward and his men have been searching for her ever since. Inspecting Solano's room, the marshals discover their first clues in the case. Both pairs of shoes issued to Solando by the hospital are still there, meaning she couldn't have made it far on the island's rocky terrain. Next, Daniels discovers a note tucked under a loose floor tile that reads, "The Law of 4, who is 67. No one is sure what that means, but Cawley confirms that it's Rachel Solando's handwriting. Next, Cawley leads the marshals to a common room for the patients. It's believed that Solando would have passed through this area, although a group of orderlies were there playing cards at the time of the escape. Daniels does not believe that she could simply just walk through unnoticed for the name and employment files that were on duty last night. A request that Cawley casually brushes off, saying only that he'll see what he can do. Daniels reminds the head doctor that this is a federal investigation involving a dangerous escaped mental patient, but Cawley remains oddly dismissive. Finally, he agrees to have the staff gather in the common room after dinner for questioning. In the meantime, Daniels and Cawley decide to look around the hospital grounds. They join the warden and his men in their search, though none of them seem to be working very hard. Warden McPherson explains that the island is 11 miles from the nearest land, so escape by sea is out of the question. And even if she tried it, the tide would have brought Solando's body back to shore. As for the island itself, the rocky terrain and abundance of hostile plant species make travel all but impossible, especially without shoes. As their search nears an end for the day, Daniels spots an old lighthouse in the distance. McPherson explains that it's used for a sewage treatment facility, and his men have already searched inside. With the sun fading, the marshals return to the hospital to begin questioning the staff. Okay, from the minute the marshals step off of the boat, something definitely seems off about all of this. For starters, there's a not-so-warm welcome that they receive from their fellow law enforcement officers. Now, all told, there are at least a half-dozen guys gathered on the dock to meet them, and most of them are packing heat. Not exactly the red carpet treatment for two duty-appointed federal agents. But hey, there is an escaped mental patient on the loose after all. Although we later learn that the escapee is a single unarmed woman who's running around without so much as shoes on her feet. So again, is all the firepower really necessary? Next, there's the facility itself. On the way into the mainland, their vehicle passes through two highly fortified security perimeters. There's an inner wall and an outer wall equipped with electrified razor wire. Supposing Rachel Solando could somehow escape from her locked cell and sneak past the orderlies on duty, there's simply no way she could overcome such robust security measures. If she's really on the loose, she couldn't have gotten that far. Rather than beating through the bushes and scouring the rocky shores, the staff should search all areas inside the perimeter for potential hiding places. Of course, that still doesn't account for the locked cell, and even if Solano can get her hands on a key, it seems unlikely that she'd lock the door behind her on the way out. Instead of an escape, it seems more likely that someone with a key could have abducted her, or at least helped her exit the cell. With this in mind, it makes sense that the investigation should begin with interrogations of any employees who are on duty during the disappearance, with access to keys in the vicinity of the missing woman's room. This makes Dr. Collins' attitude towards Daniel's request to interview the staff extremely suspicious. Almost as if he's covering up for somebody. Daniels should threaten to take the doctor into custody for obstruction of justice, or impeding an investigation, whatever it takes to get through to him and gain access to key witnesses. Odds are, if Solando was taken from the cell or had an accomplice, someone would know something. But again, there's a lot more about this case that simply doesn't add up. Solando has been missing for less than 24 hours. The feds send two federal marshals to investigate? That's not exactly a great use of resources. Massive numbers of guards on duty at the hospital, it's unlikely that they would call for outside help when they've barely begun their search. On the other hand, it really doesn't look like those guys are in any real hurry to find this woman. The marshals see a large number of guards from the supposed search party just sort of loafing around on the beach, smoking cigarettes and skipping rocks. This is not exactly what you'd expect from officers on the lookout for an escaped mental patient. It's almost like they know they aren't going to find anyone out here. This investigation is just getting started, but the marshals are already knee-deep in red flags. To get to the bottom of things, they'll have to push the suspicious doctor and his staff for answers as they continue their search for the truth. The assembled orderlies and nurses all back up Dr. Colley's account of the night Rachel Solando went missing. None of them saw anything, and they agree there's no way she could have snuck past them. Continuing the questioning, Daniels tries to reconstruct the events leading up to the disappearance. One of the nurses explains that Solando had taken part in a group therapy session earlier that night, led by Dr. Sheehan, the psychiatrist in charge of her care. When Daniels asks to question the doctor, Colley explains that it won't be possible. Sheehan left on the ferry that morning for a planned vacation. Appalled by this breach in investigation, Daniels asks if Dr. Sheehan can be reached by phone. Unfortunately, it seems like the phone lines are down due to a storm on the mainland, so Colley leaves the marshals to collect his rounds, but invites them to join him at his residence later that night for drinks and cigars. Arriving at Colley's Swank living quarters with the doctor, the investigators are introduced to Dr. Nering, another senior member of Nering's staff. As German national, Nering engages the marshals in an intellectual debate on what he perceives as their violent nature. The line of questioning triggers Daniel's graphic memories from his time serving in World War II. Having had enough of the doctor's games, he again requests to see the files on Dr. Sheehan, which is Rachel Solando's primary psychiatrist who conveniently left for vacation just before her escape. But when Nering refuses to comply, nearby, Daniels' temper reaches its boiling point. As far as he's concerned, this investigation is over. If they can't get the information they need, the marshals will simply hand off the case and return to the mainland in the morning. Deputy Warden McPherson takes them to the orderlies' quarters to bed down for the night. In their bunks, Daniels and all regroup and discuss their next move. Daniels is convinced there's more to the story than Polly and the others are letting on. I mean, there's simply no way Solando could have escaped on her own. Someone had to have helped her. Maybe given some time to sleep on it, the doctor will have a different story to tell in the morning. In the meantime, Daniel's dreams are haunted by visions of his dead wife, who urges him to continue the investigation. If subconscious visions are correct, Rachel Solando is still there somewhere on the island. And so is someone else. Someone named Andrew Latus. Okay, the only thing louder than Teddy's tie are the countless red flags that are piling up around him. First of all, the fact that none of the orderlies or nurses saw anything suspicious during Rachel Solando's disappearance seems a little too convenient, especially given the high-security nature of the facility. A patient vanishing without a trace near multiple trained staff members only reinforces the idea that the escape itself was staged. Not a single orderly, nurse, or even a janitor taking a smoke break managed to catch a glimpse of the barefoot, mentally unstable woman sneaking around by herself? Seems legit. The marshals need to press the staff hard for answers here. I mean, who had the keys to Solando's cell? And who might have had a motive for wanting to get rid of her? Maybe the threat of time in the federal pen will be enough to get somebody talking. Then there's Dr. Sheehan, Rachel's primary psychiatrist, who conveniently hopped on the ferry the morning after she vanished. Sure, because nothing says responsible doctor like skipping town the minute your dangerous mental patient pulls a Houdini. If Solando's escape is serious enough to warrant an immediate response from the U.S. Marshals Service, a full lockdown of the island seems like a no-brainer. Unless, of course, Sheehan was running from something. So this woman goes missing, and the one person with the most intimate access to her is the only other person on the island who's unaccounted for? Sounds like an open and shut case. Daniels should start asking the tough questions about Dr. Sheehan. Was there anything strange or inappropriate going on between him and Rachel Solando? Until a better theory presents itself, Sheehan is clearly the prime suspect. Of course, it's kind of hard to follow up on leads when the phone lines to the mainland are down. Another unfortunate snag in the investigation that seems a little too convenient. You know, the phone lines are down sounds like something you might say if you were covering for a subordinate. One who you also just let waltz out of an active crime scene for a poorly timed holiday. I think enough is enough. They might have taken their guns, but surely the marshals still have cuffs on them. Between his unwillingness to assist in the investigation and his fishy behavior surrounding Dr. Sheehan, it's time to take Dr. Cawley into custody and get further investigation. Lock him in one of the cells for the night and drag him back out to the mainland on the morning ferry for questioning. Who knows? Maybe he'll prove more helpful than power. As for problematic doctors, this island is just crawling with them. Rounding out the bunch is Neri, the German psychiatrist who seems a little too interested in Teddy's personal baggage. The doctor's probing questions about violence and trauma seem eerily personal, almost as if he knows more about Daniels than he should. Is this normal after-dinner conversation around here, or is something more sinister afoot? I don't know, but only time will tell. Daniels awakes in a puddle thanks to a leak in the ceiling above his bunk. Outside, the storm rages on, which means travel by ferry is out of the question. Seeing as they're stuck on the island, Daniels picks up the investigation by demanding to see the other patients from Rachel Solando's therapy group. Cawley finally agrees, and the questioning begins. At first, it seems like the disturbed patients from Solando's group don't have much useful information to offer. That is, until they start in on Mrs. Kearns, the woman who was killed for killing her husband with an axe. Kearns confirms Cawley's statements about Rachel Solando and Dr. Sheehan, but grows more evasive as Daniels pushes her for details about the doctor. For one last question, Daniels asks Mrs. Kearns if she knows anything about a patient named Andrew Latus. Visibly upset, she denies having heard of him before quickly leaving the interview. With the interrogations finished, All has some questions of his own for his partner, Who is Andrew Laeddis, and why did Daniels ask each of the patients about him? Daniels reluctantly explains that Laeddis was the maintenance man at his old apartment building. He was also a known arsonist who he claims was responsible for the fire that killed his wife. Though he was never convicted of the crime, Laeddis was later arrested for burning down a schoolhouse and was brought to the hospital on Shutter Island to serve out his sentence. Daniels says that all records of Laeddis have vanished, so when the opportunity to investigate another case on the island arrived, he volunteered in hopes of discovering the truth about his wife's death and the disappearance of her alleged killer. As the marshals nose around the hospital cemetery for clues, the storm reaches new heights, and they're forced to take shelter in the mausoleum. Here, Daniels further explains what he's really up to. From his prior investigations, he's come to believe the hospital is merely a front for illegal human experiments by the US government, with patients serving as unwilling guinea pigs. But all takes it a step further. Daniels starts digging into the truth behind this place, and suddenly US Marshals are called in for an investigation? The timing seems too good to be true. I mean, it sounds like someone wanted him to be there, and come to think of it, what evidence do they have that this missing woman, Rachel Solando, ever existed in the first place? Okay, so turns out there's more to this investigation than Teddy was letting on. Unfortunately for the patients at Ashcliff, Daniels could be onto something. The history of the US government experimenting on human test subjects, particularly psychological experiments, includes several well-documented and controversial programs. These experiments were often conducted in the name of national security, medical advancement, or psychological research, sometimes without the informed consent of the participants. I mean, one of the most infamous of these psychological experiments was Project MKUltra, and it was designed to explore mind control interrogation techniques, as well as psychological manipulation. It's real, look it up. Beginning in 1953, the program involved administering drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and other extreme treatments on subjects, many of whom were unaware that they were being experimented on. This program went on for decades with the goal of developing techniques for espionage and counterintelligence during the Cold War. But much of its documentation was destroyed, leaving many details shrouded in mystery. Daniels' suspicion about the hospital and its staff bear striking similarities to the real-life MKUltra program, with unwitting patients being drugged and experimented on as some part of a nefarious government plot. Deputy Warden McPherson previously mentioned that Dr. Colley has many connections with various federal agencies, which adds further suspicion to a possible connection between the hospital and the government. Some larger conspiracy at work would also explain why Ashcliff's staff is so evasive when it comes to the Solando case, refusing to provide files or direct answers that could aid in the investigation. Instead of bluntly asking each patient the latest, especially in front of the very people he suspects, he could ease into the topic by probing for inconsistencies in their stories, identifying who seems the most anxious or the most evasive. Rather than loudly announcing his suspicions, a better tactic would be to gain the patient's trust first, or aligning himself as someone who is skeptical of the hospital's practices. It would also help to question him in private away from staff oversight. But even if Daniels refines his approach, one question remains. Is Laeddis really here, or is it just another layer of deception? Leaving him to question not only the intentions of Ashcliff's staff, but also his own perception of reality. If the hospital really is a front for government experiments, how deep does the conspiracy go? A sudden gust of wind blows the mausoleum doors off their hinges, and the deputy warden arrives with a car to drive the marshals back to the hospital, where Dr. Colley is waiting to speak with them. After a quick shower, an orderly offers them each a set of wipes to change into, along with a couple of smokes. Joining Colley and his colleagues in a meeting, Daniels overhears them discussing plans for safeguarding the hospital's 66 patients. Daniels picks up on this detail, pressing the doctors on Solando's note, which makes mention of the number 67. Is she implying there's a secret? 67th patient here? Whatever the case, it doesn't really matter now. Their investigation is over. Rachel Solando has been found. The marshals are taken to Solando's cell, where the once missing woman awaits. In spite of her roaming the treacherous grounds on her bare feet, She doesn't appear to have a scratch on her. Daniels attempts to question her, but the conversation doesn't get too far due to the woman's fragile mental state. Afterward, in his office, Paulie explains that Solando was found down by the lighthouse skipping stones. Suddenly, Daniels is stricken by an excruciating migraine. Collie offers him pills to alleviate his pain, and he's helped into a bed in the hospital's lower floor, where the staff are riding out the storm. Here, his dreams once again focus on disturbing memories of the Allied liberation of a concentration camp mixed with haunting visions of Rachel Solando and her murdered children. Finally, he's again visited by the apparition of his wife, who urges him to seek out Latus on the island and extract his revenge. Daniels awakes to a chaotic scene. The hospital's backup generators have failed in the storm. All the patients' doors have unlocked as well. As the staff have their hands full gathering the escapees, Daniels hatches a plan. With all of the electric fences and gates disabled, now is the perfect time to search the forbidden Ward C for any signs of any untoward experiments, or maybe even Andrew Latus himself. The staff agrees and they make their way to the imposing structure. Inside, the two are separated when one of the escaped inmates challenges them to a game of tag. The madman almost gets the better of Daniels, but he eventually turns the tables, badly hurting his attacker in the process. As Chuck and one of the guards help the patient to the infirmary, Daniels continues deeper into Ward C on his own. Navigating the labyrinth inside the old Civil War fort, he finds the cells occupied by the hospital's most dangerous patients. At the back of the cell block, Daniels spots one inmate huddled shirtless in the corner. At first, he thinks he's found Latus, but it's actually someone else from his past, George Noyce, a former patient at Ashcliff who was his informant regarding the atrocities happening at the hospital. It seems Noyce has been returned to custody on the island, and he isn't too happy to see Daniels either. He blames the marshal for his situation, claiming it's his obsession with Latus that's landed them both here. He says all of this, the missing woman, the investigation, and even his brand new partner, is all some kind of twisted game being played just for him. Finally, he offers Daniels a final warning: forget his wife and give up the hunt for Latus, or he'll never be able to leave this island. Okay, Daniels' bedside manner needs a little adjustment. To make it worse, he continues to ignore countless red flags from the hospital staff that seem to point to the larger conspiracy unfolding around the island. Considering the note they found reads, "Who is 67?" Daniels fails to investigate this possible slip-up, so then it turns out that Rachel Solando has been located and she's safe and sound. Meanwhile, the winds out there are strong enough to knock down trees and rip doors off their hinges, but he doesn't have a scratch on him. Again, it seems far more likely that Rachel had help, or was intentionally relocated by staff to some secret location on the island. Ask who took her from the cell the previous night, or what she remembers about the note she hid beneath the floor tile. Starting with Noyce's claim that the entire investigation is a game specifically designed just for him. You know, come to think of it, this theory would explain a lot about the many glaring inconsistencies he's uncovered so far. Instead, Daniels barrels forward, unaware that he might be chasing a truth that's more complicated than anything. Noyce tells Daniels he won't find Latus in Ward C. He's been transferred, and he isn't in the main ward. There's only one place that he could be: the lighthouse. Daniels makes his way towards the exit and is soon joined by his panicked partner. Playing it cool with the guards, they make their way out of Ward C and into the surrounding woods. Here, Chuck explains that he made a stop in the records department. He didn't find a file on Latus, but he did come across his intake form. Suspicious of his partner's motives following his conversation with Noyce, Daniels declines to continues deeper into the woods towards the lighthouse. The marshals emerge from the woods at the island's edge. The lighthouse shines in the distance as Chuck once again urges his partner to have a look at the intake form. After all, the document proves the crucial evidence that they'll need to prove the existence of a major conspiracy. Still, Daniels remains disinterested. He's getting to that lighthouse no matter how dangerous the path may be. Chuck pleads with him to reconsider, but Daniels has had enough. He ditches his partner and heads back into the woods towards his destination. Moments later, Daniels arrives at another the Though he's much closer to the lighthouse, the structure is still far from reach in the rocky waters beneath him. Returning to where he left his
There's stuff
partner,
I
he
can't build
spots
in
a
that
lit
house.
cigarette
Get from-
smoldering on a nearby rock. When he goes in for a closer look, he spies a body lying motionless in the tidewater below. It looks like Chuck has fallen. Daniels climbs down the treacherous rock face to reach his partner. On the way down, he manages to grab Ladis's intake form as it blows by in the breeze, stuffing it into his pocket before continuing his descent. When he reaches the bottom, Chuck's body is nowhere in sight. Instead, a horde of rats swarm over the jagged rocks. Above, Daniels spots light flickering in the mouth of a cliffside cave. Stepping over the mass of rodents, he climbs up the rock face to investigate. Inside the cave, Daniels finds a ragged-looking woman huddled over a fire. She recognizes him as the marshal she'd heard about, and he guesses her identity as well, Rachel Solando, or rather, the real Rachel Solando. Solando explains that she was once a doctor at the hospital before she was taken captive for asking too many questions. Apparently, she'd gotten a little too close to a government plan to create an army of brainwashed super soldiers through experimental brain surgeries, conducted secretly inside the lighthouse. As a result, the senior hospital staff had all records of her existence wiped clean, and fabricated a new identity for her as a mental patient. She warns Daniels that they'll do the same to him by pointing to some trauma from his past, like the death of his wife, to mark him insane and have him committed. Furthermore, she explains that his headaches, hallucinations, and bad dreams are a sign that they've already begun slipping him drugs. There's no one here he can trust. From the doctors and nurses to the wardens and orderlies, each member of the hospital staff is in on the conspiracy. Okay, if Daniels wasn't paranoid enough already, this ought to do the trick. After searching the island high and low for clues, he finally happens upon the real Rachel Solando, who confirms all of his worst fears about the doctors and what they're really up to at the ash cliff. But can he really trust this woman, or is she merely leading him further off track from the truth? Maybe the better question is, can he trust himself? For a guy who prides himself on being a sharp investigator, Daniels sure has a talent for missing the giant, flashing lights that something isn't right. First off, his outright refusal to look at Ladis's intake form is nothing short of a professional malpractice. Even if he thinks Chuck might be compromised, wouldn't it make sense to at least glance at the form and judge for himself? It's either the worst case of tunnel vision or some next-level denial, but either way, it's a textbook example of how not to investigate a mystery. Then there's the choice to climb down the cliff when he spots Chuck's lifeless body. I mean, we're talking about a sheer drop onto jagged rock. One wrong step, and Daniels isn't solving any mysteries. He's just adding himself to the island's body count. And what's the actual plan here? Even if Chuck is somehow still alive, there's a good chance he's not in great shape. And Daniels has no medical supplies, no backup, and no way to get his partner back on the cliff. And let's not forget the bigger picture. He's on the run, supposedly unraveling a vast conspiracy. And now he's willingly isolating himself in the most precarious position possible. Like, suppose Chuck didn't actually fall, but was pushed. If so, whoever is responsible might still be close by, watching and waiting to tie up any loose ends. Putting himself in this predicament by running off alone to investigate the lighthouse was a pretty amateur mistake, plain and simple. Up to this point, Chuck has been his own ally, the one person who's had his back through all the twists and turns of this investigation. Yet, instead of sticking together when things get really dicey, Daniels suddenly decides he's better off alone, because why not make yourself an easier target on an island crawling with people who may or may not want to silence you? If he truly thought there was a conspiracy afoot, then having a partner, even one, question would have been his best chance at survival. So let Chuck tag along to the lighthouse and, hell, maybe take a look at that intake form along the way. But with Chuck out of the picture, Daniels finds a new chum to bounce conspiracy theories off of in the esteemed Dr. Rachel Solando. So, one of the hospital's own got a little too close to a government brainwashing plot and ended up a patient herself. But wait a minute, why would Collie hire a psychiatrist who wasn't on board with his scheme? We've already established that he runs runs every aspect of the hospital operations. And if this new Solando is to be believed, every member of the staff down to the janitor is in on the conspiracy. So if the experiments are the real reason behind the hospital's existence, what would she even be doing there if she didn't have some part to play in all of this? If Daniels would just take a moment to consider this woman's story, he'd quickly realize that there's a lot here that simply does not. Like, for starters, Solando clocks him as one of the marshals as soon as he steps foot in the cave. But how would she know there are marshals on the island when they only arrived after the escape? Maybe it's just a lucky guess, but as a marshal, Teddy should try turning his investigative lens on this woman instead of falling headlong down the conspiracy rabbit hole. How did she manage to get locked out of her cell? Why would she leave her shoes behind? What's the rule of 4? These are all worthwhile questions that can help him decide if this woman is trustworthy or not, or just another escaped mental patient prone to paranoid delusions. And yet, rather than interrogating her further or connecting the many glaring inconsistencies in her story, Daniels dives right into her narrative as if he's desperate for the pieces to fit, no matter how warped they are. With Chuck missing, the intake form ignored, and his latest informant leading the case surrounded by rats, Teddy's investigation is starting to look less like a mission for justice and more like a fever dream unraveling in real time. Still, he's convinced the answers lie just ahead, waiting for him in the lighthouse. After spending the night in the cave, Solando wakes Daniels and tells him to get going. Her captors think that she's dead, but they might find her if they come looking for him. Daniels leaves the cave and climbs back up the cliffs to wander in the woods. He's soon discovered by one of the senior warden, who drives him back to the hospital grounds. Daniels soon runs into Collie inside, who questions him about his absence over the last few hours. His explanation is kind of weak, but it doesn't really matter. He'll be leaving now that the investigation is over, right? Perhaps they'll let him go after all. But when Daniels asks Collie if he's seen any sign of Chuck, the doctor feigns ignorance. He claims Daniels has no partner, and he arrived on the island alone. Playing along, he agrees that he'll be taking the ferry soon and heads to the showers to freshen up. After his shower, Daniels heads for the exit, but is quickly stopped by Dr. Nayrig, who attempts to inject him with a sedative. Daniels subdues the doctor and makes his escape, but the ferry will have to wait. If Collie says Chuck never existed, then it can only mean one thing: his partner is next in line for some twisted experiment. Daniels blows up a nearby car for distraction and heads towards the lighthouse to free his companion. There, he knocks out a lone guard and commandeers his rifle before heading inside. Daniels ascends a tall spiral staircase, stopping in several rooms on the way up, but finds nothing really remarkable. No sign of clandestine brain surgery, just one empty room after another. At the top of the lighthouse, he kicks down one last door with the rifle at the ready. Inside, Dr. Collie sits alone at a desk. He informs him that the rifle he holds is empty and asks him to take a seat. The room is pristine. There's no laboratory, no secret medical experiments, no patients undergoing brain surgery. Instead, Collie delivers the shocking truth. Teddy Daniels is actually Andrew Layton, a patient at Ashcliff and one of the most dangerous men on the island. Dr. Collie explains that Andrew has been living in a delusional state, unable to accept the devastating reality of his past. Oh, he was a U.S. Marshal, but his life fell apart after his wife Dolores drowned there in a lake in the house. When Andrew discovered what he had done, he was overcome with grief and killed her. Unable to face the truth, he created a new identity: Teddy Daniels, a U.S. Marshal investigating the case of an arsonist named Andrew Latis, who he blamed for his wife's death. Dr. Collie explains that this entire investigation has been an elaborate role-playing experiment designed to shake Andrew out of his delusion. The doctors allowed him to live out his fantasy, hoping that by reaching his own conclusions,